I left my boyfriend because he earned too little at work, and he had to work 5 days to take me out as I deserve. My new boyfriend always has money since his parents always give him everything. Let's be honest from the start because I don't have time for the fake modesty most people perform. I am an investment, a high-end asset that requires a specific level of maintenance to remain at peak performance. For 2 years, I tried to make it work with Adrian, my ex-boyfriend, but it was like trying to run a luxury showroom on a thrift store budget. He was a sweet guy, I suppose, if you value sweetness over liquid assets and social standing. We met during a summer internship where he was already showing signs of being a permanent member of the working class. I thought I could have fixed his ambition, but some people are just born with a ceiling that is far too low for my comfort. The cracks started appearing when I realized that every single date was a mathematical equation for him. It wasn't about the experience or the prestige, it was about how many hours of his life he had to trade for a piece of wagyu. I remember looking at him across the table and seeing the literal stress lines on his forehead as he scanned the wine list. It's incredibly dampening for a woman's spirit to be with a man who sees her presence as an expense rather than a privilege. I felt like I was dating a human calculator, and the numbers were never in my favor. He would hold my hand and tell me he was working hard for our future, but his version of a future looked remarkably like a middle-class tragedy. The breaking point was that pathetic rooftop bar incident that he actually thought was a grand gesture. He sat me down with this look of desperate pride, telling me he had worked 5 full days of overtime just to secure a reservation and pay for a dinner. I wasn't moved, I was deeply, profoundly insulted that my worth was equated to less than a week of his mediocre labor. It felt like he was handing me a participation trophy for a race I never agreed to run. If a man has to sweat and starve just to take me to a decent place, he clearly can't afford to be in my presence. It was a failing stock, and I decided it was time to liquidate before I lost any more of my prime years. That's when Matthew entered the picture, and the contrast was like switching from a flickering candle to a stadium floodlight. Matthew, my new boyfriend, doesn't understand the concept of working for a reservation because his last name is basically a key to the city. His family owns half the real estate in the downtown district, meaning he doesn't have to calculate the cost of a lifestyle that is simply his birthright. When we go out, money isn't a conversation, it's an invisible, infinite atmospheric pressure that supports everything we do. He doesn't look at price tags because, quite frankly, they are beneath his notice. I finally felt like I was in the environment I was designed for, surrounded by the smell of expensive leather and old money. The breakup with Adrian was swift and, in my opinion, very merciful, even if he didn't see it that way. I told him that our vibrations were no longer aligned, which is a polite way of saying his bank account was dragging my social credit score into the gutter. He had the audacity to cry, mentioning all the sacrifices he had made to keep me happy over the last few years. It was so exhausting to watch him play the martyr over basic necessities that a real man should provide without a second thought. I walked out of his cramped apartment and felt a literal weight lift off my shoulders as I stepped into Matthew's waiting car. Adrian's effort was just a loud, clunky machine that produced nothing of value, while Matthew's wealth was a silent, perfect engine. Matthew's first gift to me was a pair of designer stilettos that cost more than Adrian's monthly rent. They are actually a size too small, which makes walking feel like a medieval torture session, but the aesthetic is undeniable. I told Matthew they were a bit tight, and he just smiled and said that beauty always demands a sacrifice from the wearer. I wore them to our first high society event, ignoring the sharp stabs of pain in my toes because the red soles looked perfect against the marble floors. It's a small price to pay for the sheer satisfaction of knowing that I am finally being curated by someone who understands luxury. My feet might be screaming, but my Instagram feed has never looked more prestigious or well-funded. I've heard through mutual friends that Adrian is devastated and has been working even harder to prove something to himself. Honestly, it's just pathetic to watch someone struggle so much for such tiny, incremental gains in life. Why would I want to be the inspiration for a man to work more shifts at a high-end catering firm? I'd much rather be the reason a man like Matthew calls his father's office to increase his monthly credit limit. Adrian thinks that struggle builds character, but I believe that struggle is just a sign of poor planning or bad genetics. I'm not a cruel person, I'm just a woman who knows that you can't build a palace on a foundation of his good intentions and overtime pay. Matthew doesn't ask me about my day in that annoying, prying way Adrian did, which I find very refreshing. Adrian used to want to connect and talk about our feelings, which was really just a cover for him to complain about his boss. Matthew understands that our relationship is a transaction of beauty and status, and as long as I look flawless, he is satisfied. It's a much more honest way to live, without all the emotional clutter that poor people use to distract themselves from their lack of resources. I am a social consultant in his world now, a role that requires me to look expensive and say very little. It's a position I've trained for my entire life, and I'm finally being compensated fairly for my natural talents. Last night, we were at a lounge, and I saw a couple that looked exactly like Adrian and me used to look. The girl was smiling at some cheap cocktail, and the guy was looking at his wallet with that familiar, panicked expression. I felt a wave of secondhand embarrassment for her, wondering how she could settle for such a low-tier existence. I looked down at my diamonds, which were catching the light in a way that made everything else in the room look dull and gray. Matthew noticed me looking and just squeezed my hand, his heavy gold watch cold against my skin. It was a reminder that I have successfully escaped the gravitational pull of the middle class and reached orbit. Adrian's biggest mistake was thinking that love was enough to keep a woman of my caliber entertained. Love doesn't pay for the chemical peels or the silk slips that maintain my image, only liquid capital can do that. He was constantly trying to give me experiences, like hiking or cooking at home, which are just code words for, I can't afford a ticket to anything interesting. With Matthew, every night is an experience that most people only see in movies or on the explore page of their phones. I've traded a man who treated me like a person for a man who treats me like a masterpiece, and I couldn't be happier. If that makes me a toxic to the people at the bottom, then they are clearly just jealous of my vision. Main story comments. Anonymous user 1 says, imagine dumping someone who worked 5 days of overtime for you just because he's low stock. You're not an investment, Romina, you're a gold digger who doesn't realize she's being leased, not bought. OP's reply, effort is what people without liquid assets offer to feel important. If he was truly high value, he wouldn't need overtime to afford a simple dinner. Anonymous user 2 says, Matthew sounds like a cardboard cutout with a trust fund. What happens when his parents cut the cord? You're dating a bank account, not a man. OP's reply, inheritance is just efficiency. Why start at zero when you can start at the finish line? His parents' wealth is a family legacy I am now part of. Update 1. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and the transition into Matthew's inner circle has been enlightening, to say the least. He took me to a private gala last Friday, an event so exclusive that the security guards looked like they were dressed by Armani. I spent 4 hours getting my hair and makeup done, ensuring that I was the perfect visual accompaniment to his family's reputation. However, a strange thing happened when we arrived. Matthew didn't introduce me to his parents, even though they were standing 10 feet away. He spent the entire night networking with tech moguls while I was left to hover near the champagne tower like a piece of high-end furniture. It felt a bit dismissive, but I assumed he was just protecting me from his mother's notoriously sharp tongue until the right moment. When I finally pulled him aside to ask why he was treating me like a stranger, he just laughed and patted my cheek in a way that felt oddly patronizing. He told me I looked decorative enough for the evening and that his parents didn't need to know my life story to appreciate the view. It was a bit of a blow to my ego, but then I looked down at the 3-carat diamond bracelet he had given me earlier that day. A man doesn't spend that much on a decorative object unless he truly values its presence in his life, right? I decided to take it as a compliment on my flawless maintenance and continued to pose for the photographers. In this world, being a luxury asset means you don't need to speak to be the most valuable thing in the room. The night took a truly bizarre and honestly quite disgusting turn when I went to grab a hors d'oeuvre from a passing tray. I looked up and locked eyes with the server, only to realize it was Adrian, looking absolutely exhausted in a cheap catering uniform. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, with beads of sweat forming on his forehead and his tie slightly crooked. For a second, he just stood there, his eyes widening as he took in my designer gown and the diamonds shimmering on my wrist. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated cinematic irony that made me want to burst out laughing right there in the ballroom. Imagine choosing a life where you have to serve appetizers to the woman you used to date because you couldn't keep up with her. I didn't say a word to him, I simply adjusted my tight, painful shoes and looked right through him as if he were part of the wallpaper. He tried to open his mouth to say something, probably some desperate plea or a pathetic attempt at a closure, but a supervisor barked an order at him. He scurried away like a frightened rabbit, disappearing back into the kitchen where the help belongs. I felt a surge of validation so strong it was almost intoxicating, knowing that I had made the absolute right choice in leaving him behind. If I had stayed with him, I might have been the one standing there in a polyester blend, worrying about the tray's weight. Instead, I am the one being served, which is the natural order of things for someone of my status. Matthew noticed the interaction and asked if I knew that waiter, his voice dripping with a casual, high-born disdain. I just shrugged and told him he looked vaguely familiar, perhaps from a dry cleaner I used to frequent back when I was still finding myself. Matthew chuckled and told me it was good that I had upgraded my surroundings because he doesn't like used goods in his social sphere. I didn't love the phrasing, but I can't deny that he has a point about the company we keep. My life is now a series of curated moments, and people like Adrian are just the background noise I've finally learned to mute. If he's miserable working the catering circuit, that's just the natural consequence of his lack of financial vision. The rest of the gala was a blur of high-proof spirits and low-voiced conversations about offshore accounts and luxury real estate. I kept catching glimpses of Adrian in the distance, and each time, it felt like a little victory lap for my own ambition. It's funny how some people think that dignity in labor is a real thing when it clearly looks so much like suffering. My feet were absolutely throbbing by the end of the night, the skin on my heels beginning to blister from the constant friction. I didn't complain once though, because a woman of my standing knows that the silhouette of a heel is more important than the comfort of a foot. I walked out of that gala on Matthew's arm, leaving Adrian to clean up the spilled champagne and the remnants of a life he could never afford. We got back to Matthew's penthouse, and he barely acknowledged me before heading into his office to check the late-night markets. I sat on the edge of the bed, gingerly peeling off those shoes and seeing the angry red marks they had left behind. It's a bit lonely in this giant glass box sometimes, but then I remember the alternative, a cramped apartment and a man who cares, but can't provide. I'd much rather be a decorative asset in a palace than a soulmate in a basement. Matthew's coldness is just a byproduct of his immense power, and I'm more than willing to tolerate a little frost for the sake of the view. Tomorrow, I'll book a high-end pedicure to fix the damage, and it will be charged directly to his family office. I've started to realize that Matthew doesn't really view people as individuals, he views them as functions. His lawyer handles his legal functions, his chef handles his nutritional functions, and I handle his social prestige functions. It's a very clean, efficient way to organize a life, and it saves everyone the trouble of messy emotional expectations. Adrian used to want to grow together, which just sounded like a lot of unpaid labor for a very uncertain result. In Matthew's world, the growth is already finished, and we are just here to enjoy the harvest. If I have to be a little bit of a silent partner in this enterprise, then so be it. I did see a post on Adrian's social media later that night. Yes, I still check, purely for the comedy of it all. He posted a picture of his tired feet with a caption about hustling for the dream and building something from scratch. I almost felt sorry for him, but then I realized that the dream for him is probably just a slightly larger apartment. He's so small-minded that he can't even imagine the level of wealth I'm currently breathing in. He thinks he's being noble, but he's just being slow, and in the world of high-stakes lifestyle management, slow is the same as dead. I'm glad I jumped ship when I did, or I'd be drowning in his hustle right now. Matthew has already mentioned a trip to the French Riviera next month, provided I stay camera ready for the entire duration. He's very particular about the image we project, which I actually find quite admirable in a man. He expects excellence, and I am more than happy to provide it as long as the diamonds keep coming. My toes might be slightly deformed from these shoes, but they'll look great on the deck of a private yacht. Adrian's love was a weight, but Matthew's expectations are a ladder, and I intend to keep climbing until I'm at the very top. If that means Adrian has to serve me my drinks along the way, then that's just a bonus. Update 1 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, he called you decorative and didn't introduce you to his parents? Romina, you're not a girlfriend, you're an accessory he's going to return when the trend dies. OP's reply, I'm a luxury asset, assets don't need to speak to be valuable. His parents will see me when the time is right, but for now, my beauty does all the talking. Anonymous user 2 says, the way you talked about Adrian working the gala is disgusting. He has more dignity in one finger than you and your decorative a boyfriend have in your entire bodies. OP's reply, dignity doesn't pay for a pedicure. If he wanted dignity, he should have chosen a career that didn't involve carrying my appetizers. Update 2. It's been 10 days since my last update, and I've decided to take a more professional approach to my relationship with Matthew. I realize that being a decorative asset is all well and good, but high-value women know that beauty requires a consistent maintenance budget. I approached Matthew about a monthly allowance, a retention fee, for my exclusivity and the considerable time I spend maintaining my appearance for his benefit. I expected him to be surprised or perhaps even a little offended, but he didn't even look up from his tablet. He simply nodded and said that he appreciated my transparency regarding operating costs, and that his family office would handle the details. It was incredibly validating to have my worth recognized in such a cold, hard, financial way. The next morning, his assistant sent over a PDF contract that made my heart skip a beat, though not necessarily in a romantic way. The document officially lists me as a social consultant and event companion, with a very generous monthly stipend attached to the title. It felt a bit corporate, seeing our relationship broken down into clauses and deliverables, but the number at the bottom was exactly what I deserve. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing that my presence has a literal market value that is protected by legal counsel. It's much better than Adrian's promises of a better life, which were never backed by anything more substantial than his good intentions. In this house, we don't do intentions, we do contracts. However, as I was reading through the fine print, I noticed a rather peculiar clause about the depreciation of appearance. It states that my stipend is contingent on maintaining a specific aesthetic standard and that any significant deviations could lead to a renegotiation of terms. Matthew explained that his family treats all their high-end acquisitions this way, ensuring that the value remains consistent over time. It's a bit jarring to be compared to a vintage car or a piece of real estate, but I suppose it makes sense from a business perspective. I'm not worried about it depreciating, because I have the best dermatologists and trainers on speed dial. I am a blue-chip investment, and I intend to stay that way for as long as possible. The physical toll of this lifestyle is starting to become a bit of a nuisance, specifically when it comes to those designer shoes. Matthew insists that I wear them whenever we are in public because he loves the way they elongate my silhouette and project a specific stature. My feet are now covered in permanent blisters, and my toes are beginning to look a bit crowded, to put it politely. I tried to suggest a pair of luxury flats for a casual brunch yesterday, but Matthew just looked at me with this cold, disappointed expression. He told me that comfort is for people who have given up on their social standing, and I immediately went back to put the heels on. It's a literal sacrifice for my career, and I'm willing to bleed a little for the sake of the brand. I feel like a bit of a martyr sometimes, limping through these 5-star lobbies while pretending that I'm walking on clouds. But then I remember that Adrian would have let me wear sneakers, and we would have been walking to a bus stop instead of a valet stand. The pain is just a constant reminder of the level I've attained, a sort of physical attacks, on my new life. If I have to lose a few toenails to maintain my position as Matthew's social consultant, it's a trade I'll make every single time. Besides, the contract includes a generous medical allowance that covers high-end foot therapy, so it's not like I'm suffering for free. Everything in this life is a trade-off, and I've traded my physical comfort for absolute financial security. Matthew's friends have started treating me with a bit more respect now that they know I'm under contract. It's as if the legal document gave me a legitimacy that my personality or beauty never could on their own. They talk to me about upcoming galas and brand alignments as if I'm a fellow executive, which I suppose I am in a way. I've become an expert at nodding at the right times and laughing at jokes that aren't particularly funny but are very expensive. My role is to be the perfect mirror for Matthew's success, reflecting his power back at him and the world. It's a high-pressure job, but the benefits package is truly out of this world. I did have a brief moment of doubt when I saw a news clipping about Adrian's catering firm winning a small local award for innovation. It's such a tiny, insignificant achievement in the grand scheme of things, but he looked so genuinely proud in the photo. He was standing there with his team, smiling like he had just conquered the world instead of just figuring out a better way to serve mini quiches. I had to remind myself that his success is still grounded in manual labor and passion, two things that don't actually buy you a seat at the table. He's happy in his little bubble of mediocrity, and I'm successful in my world of high-stakes prestige. We are simply living in two different realities now. Matthew has started sending me to refinement classes twice a week to ensure that my etiquette and conversation skills remain at a premium level. It's basically a school for trophy wives, though I prefer the term elite companion training. We learn how to enter a room, how to hold a crystal glass, and how to discuss international politics without actually having an opinion. It's incredibly dull, but it's a requirement of my social consultant role, so I attend with a smile on my face. Matthew says that my ability to adapt is my greatest asset, and I intend to be the most adaptable woman he's ever met. If he wants a silent, perfect porcelain doll, then that is exactly what he's going to get. The depreciation clause still nags at the back of my mind sometimes, especially when I see a new wrinkle or a blemish in the mirror. I've started obsessing over my skincare routine, spending hours each night applying serums that cost more than my old car. I can't afford to let my value drop even by a fraction of a percent, or I might find myself facing a market correction. It's a bit stressful living under the constant threat of a budget cut, but it also keeps me sharp and focused on my goals. I'm not just a girlfriend, I'm a high-performance machine that requires constant tuning and maintenance. It's a life of absolute discipline and very little room for error. I saw Adrian's sister at the mall the other day, and she had the nerve to look at me with pity. Pity. Me, draped in labels and carrying a bag that could buy her entire wardrobe 10 times over. She asked how I was doing, and I just gave her a cold, practiced smile and told her I was expanding my portfolio. She clearly didn't understand the metaphor, which just goes to show how far I've moved beyond that social circle. They see a contract, and they think I'm a victim, but I see a contract, and I see a guarantee. I'm moving toward the sun, and they're still shivering in the shade of their own small lives. Update 2 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, a social consultant contract? Romina, you're literally an employee who gets paid to be pretty and hurt her feet. You've traded your humanity for a paycheck and a blister. OP's reply, in this world, everyone is an employee, I just have better benefits and a much nicer office. My paycheck is a reflection of my market value, which is clearly higher than yours. Anonymous user 2 says, that depreciation clause is a massive red flag. He's telling you exactly how he views you as an object that he'll toss as soon as you get a wrinkle. Wake up. OP's reply, I have the best dermatologists on speed dial and a lifestyle that prevents aging. I don't depreciate, I accumulate value through prestige and experience. Update 3. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and the market correction I was so worried about has arrived in the most brutal way possible. Matthew's mother finally agreed to meet me, or rather, she agreed to inspect me during a private lunch at their estate. She didn't speak to me directly for the first 20 minutes, she spoke about me to Matthew as if I were a used car he was thinking about trading in. She looked at my shoes, my hair, and my posture with a cold, clinical eye that made me feel like I was under a microscope. She told Matthew quite loudly that I was out of season and that my social reach was far too narrow for their family's expanding interests. I tried to offer a sophisticated comment about my social consultant role, but she just looked through me as if I were made of glass. The humiliation didn't stop there, as Matthew didn't even attempt to defend me or my contracted value. He just sat there nodding, his eyes drifting across the room as if he were already bored with the conversation. His mother continued, noting that his previous model and heiress to a shipping fortune had a much better social ROI and a family name that actually meant something. I felt my face burning with a mix of rage and shame, but I couldn't say anything because I was technically on the clock. It was the first time I realized that my status was entirely dependent on a man who viewed me as a replaceable line item. I was a luxury asset that was being liquidated in favor of a newer, more profitable acquisition. After his mother left, Matthew turned to me with the same casual coldness he uses to discuss his stock portfolio. He told me that I should probably start looking for a new contract by the end of the month because his parents had found a girl whose family owns a global shipping company. He said it wasn't personal, just a strategic alignment that his family office felt was necessary for their current growth phase. He even had the audacity to offer to let me keep the shoes as a severance package. The shoes that have literally deformed my toes and turned my feet into a map of scars and blisters. It was a cold, calculated dismissal that left me standing in his marble foyer feeling like a discarded wrapper. The irony of the situation is almost too much to bear, though I refuse to call it anything as dramatic as a karma. It's just a market shift, a sudden drop in my perceived value that I didn't see coming. I've spent months perfecting my image and sacrificing my comfort for a man who dropped me the second a better model became available. I gave up a man who worked overtime for me for a man who wouldn't even spend 5 minutes defending my honor to his mother. Now, I'm being phased out like an old software update, and I don't even have the dignity of a proper breakup. I'm just a contract that isn't being renewed, a social consultant whose services are no longer required. I spent the rest of the day packing my things into the expensive luggage Matthew had bought me, feeling a bitter sting with every item I folded. I looked at those designer stilettos sitting in the corner, and for the first time, I didn't see status, I just saw pain. They are the only thing I have left of this dream life, a pair of shoes that I can barely walk in and a body that has been depreciated by his family's impossible standards. I thought I was the one playing the game, but it turns out I was just a piece on the board, and Matthew was the one holding the controller. It's a hard pill to swallow, knowing that I am the one who has been liquidated while everyone else moves on. I tried to call Matthew one last time to see if we could renegotiate, but his assistant informed me that all future communications should go through the family office. I am officially a former associate, a title that carries exactly zero prestige in the world I worked so hard to enter. I'm sitting in my new, much smaller apartment, surrounded by labels that feel like they belong to a different person. I sacrificed everything for a status that was never truly mine, and now I'm left with the physical and emotional scars to prove it. My feet are so swollen that I can't even put on regular flats, let alone the severance heels Matthew let me keep. I did see a post from Adrian. Yes, I'm still looking, and no, I don't care what you think. He's actually doing quite well, his catering company is expanding, and he looks happy in a way that I never was with Matthew. He's with some girl who looks like she buys her clothes at the mall, someone who probably appreciates his effort and doesn't care about his credit limit. It makes me sick to my stomach, seeing him succeed while I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to pay my own rent again. He's still low tier in my mind, but at least he's the master of his own tiny kingdom. I was just a temporary guest in someone else's palace, and the locks have been changed. I'm trying to stay positive, telling myself that this is just a pivot in my career and that a higher bidder will come along eventually. But the truth is, I'm exhausted from the constant maintenance and the fear of it depreciating in someone else's eyes. I've spent so much time being a decorative asset that I've forgotten how to be a person, and it's a terrifying realization. I'm not a victim of Matthew, I'm a victim of my own ambition, and the price of that ambition has been incredibly high. I'm going to spend the next few days resting my feet and trying to find a way to rebrand myself for the next opportunity. I am a survivor, even if I'm a survivor with permanent foot damage and a bruised ego. People will say that I got what I deserved, that I was punished for my vanity and my coldness toward Adrian. But they don't understand that the world of luxury is a battlefield, and sometimes you get wounded in the line of duty. I don't regret choosing Matthew over Adrian, I just regret that Matthew's family had a more efficient strategy than I did. I will find another contract, another man who appreciates the premium quality I bring to the table. I just need a little time to recover from this market correction and get back on my feet if my feet will ever let me stand again. This isn't the end of my story, it's just a very painful, very expensive chapter. I'm staring at the social consultant contract one last time before I shred it, realizing that it was never a guarantee of security. It was just a lease on my life, and the landlord decided he wanted a new tenant. I'm going to take the diamonds he gave me to a jeweler tomorrow to see what they're actually worth on the open market. I need to know if I have enough capital to sustain myself until the next investment opportunity comes along. I'm not going back to the Adrians of the world, I'd rather be a fallen queen than a happy peasant. My pride is the only thing Matthew couldn't take from me, even if it's currently limping. Update 3 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, the irony of being replaced by a newer model is just chef's kiss. You were a line item, Romina, and you just got cut from the budget. How's that for a market correction? OP's reply, it's a market correction, nothing more. I'll find a higher bidder who understands that my experience and prestige are worth more than a new model's family name. Anonymous user 2 says, Adrian is actually successful now, and you're sitting in a small apartment with deformed toes and a severance pair of shoes. He definitely won this breakup. OP's reply, Adrian is still poor, his peace of mind is just a cope for mediocrity. His little boutique company is a drop in the ocean compared to the world I belong in. Update 4. It's been 5 days since my last update, and the silence from Matthew's side has been absolute. I'm sitting in my apartment, the air feeling heavy with the realization that the life I built was nothing more than a temporary stage set. I can't even put on those designer shoes anymore, my feet are so swollen and distorted that even a basic slipper feels like a threat. I look at them sitting there on the floor, the premium leather, and the stature they were supposed to provide, and all I see is a monument to my own delusions. I thought I was the one in control, a social consultant who had mastered the game of prestige, but I was just a girl who broke her own body for a seat at a table that didn't want her. The pain in my feet is a constant, throbbing reminder of every step I took toward a status that was never actually mine to keep. I saw a post from Adrian this morning, and for the first time, it didn't make me angry, it just made me feel hollow. He's officially opened his own boutique catering company, and he looks genuinely, radiantly happy standing next to a woman who actually looks at him with respect. She isn't wearing designer labels, and they aren't on a yacht, but they look like they're living a life that isn't a performance. Matthew hasn't answered a single one of my texts, and his assistant finally sent a courier to pick up the jewelry for inventory purposes, claiming it was all on loan from the family trust. I realized that I wasn't the queen of the castle, I was just a line item in a budget that got cut, a decorative asset that was returned to the warehouse. I sacrificed my comfort, my health, and a man who actually valued my soul for a luxury that was just a lease I couldn't afford to renew. Now, I have nothing but a pair of shoes I can't wear, feet that will never be the same, and the cold realization that I traded my life for a brand name.